All right, today we are diving deep into one of the most just audacious corporate frauds in American history. This is the story of a massive healthcare empire that for years was basically built on a multi-billion-dollar lie. So how they do it? Let's get into it.
Okay, so at the very heart of this whole scandal is this one number, $2.7 billion. I mean, think about that. That's not revenue, that's not assets, that's the amount of profit that was just completely made up. It's a number so big, it's kind of hard to even wrap your head around it.
So yeah, that leads us right to the big question here, right? How does a major publicly traded company, how do they fake profits that big? We're not talking about a small accounting error. We're talking about inventing billions of dollars out of thin air and getting away with it for 7 years. How did they pull that off right under everyone's nose?
Well, to really get this story, you have to start with the man at the very top, the kingpin of this whole operation. We're talking about Richard Scrushy. He was the founder, the CEO, and he was this incredibly charismatic, larger-than-life figure who built the entire HealthSouth empire.
And believe me, it was some empire. HealthSouth's growth was just insane. It started out as just a small rehab clinic back in the 80s. Then, boom, in the 90s, it just exploded all over the US. By the early 2000s, this thing was a $20 billion giant in healthcare. It was a total Wall Street darling.
But, you know, behind that shiny facade of success, something else was going on. A massive, multi-billion-dollar deception was cooking. So let's pull back the curtain and see exactly how they faked a fortune. And it all started right from the top. The pressure to meet Wall Street's expectations every single quarter was just immense. And according to people who testified later, Scrushy basically pressured his employees, his accountants, to just cook the books. Make the numbers work no matter what it took. This wasn't some rogue accountant, this came from the top.
Okay, so the fraud itself, it might seem really complex, but when you boil it down, it was like a playbook with 3 basic steps. Step 1, you've got that insane pressure to hit those Wall Street earnings targets. Step 2, executives would actually get together in a room and just make up revenue numbers to meet those targets. And then step 3, they had to hide all that fake money somewhere to make the books look legit.
And this is how they hid it. Now, you're going to hear some technical terms like fictitious accounts receivable and capex, but don't let the jargon throw you off. What they were doing was actually pretty simple and incredibly bold. They were literally just creating fake invoices for stuff that never happened and jacking up the value of their buildings and equipment on the books.
And look, this wasn't just one little trick they were using. It was a whole fraud toolkit. We're talking fake contracts, ballooning inventory numbers, hiding massive amounts of company debt. They were even systematically going into the fixed asset ledgers and just changing the numbers. All these little and not so little lies, they all added up to that mind-boggling $2.7 billion number.
But here's the thing about a lie that big. You can't keep it going forever. I mean, they managed to pull it off for 7 years, which is incredible in itself, but eventually, the walls started closing in. And that whole house of cards, it came tumbling down hard.
And man, when it fell apart fast. It was breathtaking, really. In early 2003, a whistleblower finally came forward and tipped off federal investigators. By March, boom, the SEC is raiding HealthSouth headquarters. And then, just a few days after that, trading is halted, the stock price completely collapses. It's worthless. 7 years of lies, just gone in a puff of smoke, taking countless people's savings right along with it.
So what about the company itself? Well, the financial fallout was just immense. HealthSouth, the corporation, ended up pleading guilty, and to settle all the charges, they had to pay a jaw-dropping $1.4 billion in restitution. Okay, so with the fraud this huge, you'd think the story ends in a pretty predictable way, right? The guy at the top, the kingpin, he goes to prison for a very, very long time. But what happened next in the courtroom is where this story takes a turn that absolutely nobody saw coming. The final verdict was, well, it was wild. On one side, you've got Richard Scrushy, the CEO, acquitted on all 36 charges related to the fraud. Then on the other side, you have his CFOs, 5 of them, all convicted, all served prison time. The people who reported to him went down, but the man at the very top of the pyramid, he walked free.
I mean, this just begs the question that everyone was asking, right? How is that even possible? How does the CEO get off scot-free when the very people he hired, the people carrying out the fraud, are all found guilty? Well, it all came down to what the jury heard, or more importantly, what they didn't hear. The prosecutors had the testimony from the CFOs, sure, but they couldn't produce that one killer piece of evidence. You know, the smoking gun. There was no email, no recording of Scrushy explicitly saying, "Go cook the books." And his defense team did a brilliant job arguing that he was just a big-picture CEO who had no idea this was happening. Now, here's a really important detail you can't forget. Scrushy did eventually go to prison, but it was for a totally separate bribery case later on.
But the story doesn't really end there with the verdict, because the collapse of HealthSouth, along with other huge scandals around that time like Enron, well, it cast this long, dark shadow over all of corporate America. It was a wake-up call that forced everyone to fundamentally change the rules of the game.
And the biggest change to come out of all this was something called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, or SOX for short. This was a huge piece of federal law. Its entire purpose was to stop another HealthSouth or Enron from ever happening again. And here's the key part. It put the responsibility squarely on the shoulders of CEOs and CFOs. From then on, they had to personally sign off on their financial reports, and if those reports were bogus, they'd face serious consequences.
It really created a massive dividing line, a before SOX and an after SOX for corporate America. Before, you had these loopholes and vulnerabilities that a powerful CEO could just drive a truck through. But after SOX, we entered a whole new era of accountability, with way stricter rules and much, much harsher penalties for this kind of fraud.
And that kind of brings us to our final thought here, and it's a big one. We know the story, we know what happened, and we know about the new rules that were put in place to stop it. But the real question is, have they actually worked? I mean, in a healthcare system that is still under enormous pressure to make a profit, can we say for sure that the ghost of HealthSouth is gone for good? It's definitely something to think about.